Hello, and welcome to another edition of Mini Bites. We are on week 3, part 2 of Easter in Esther. Please turn in your Bibles to Esther chapter 6. To catch us up in part 1 of week 3, for Esther chapter 5, to conclusion, we talked about Haman getting prepared to go to the king and try to get his permission, get a warrant, if you will, to get Mordecai hung on the gallows. And we talked about the gallows on Sunday in part 1 of week 3, what that meant and all of that. So we won't go into that. But he has the gallows all prepared, and he's wanting to execute Mordecai. He just can't stand it any longer, that he will not bow down or move out of his way or give him any kind of honor whatsoever that is due him. And so he's wanting to execute him early. He cannot wait for the 12th month when all of the Jews will be executed. He wants to get him out of the way and execute him 75 feet high on the gallows, wants him hung, and wants to see him publicly executed. So he's going to go to the king, and that's where we pick up in Esther chapter 6. So here we go. Esther chapter 6, verse 1 says, "That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes." This was from chapter 2, verse 23, which we had talked about a couple weeks ago. Verse 3. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. So here is, again, the providence of God on full display. So it's just amazing. We don't know for sure what's going on, but it would seem as if that this is early in the morning, and we're going to see this from context, because right away we're going to see that Haman comes in, that he's in the outer courts of the court. So it's probably early in the morning. He wakes up early, can't sleep, and so he goes ahead and calls for the Chronicles to be read to him. So this is possibly something that's done periodically, maybe early in the morning. Maybe it's something that is done when the king can't sleep. It's probably part of the king's duties so that he can find out things that needs to be done, something like that. Maybe it's possible that this was right where the king left off. So again, the providence of God that this is where the attendant or the king's servant left off last, that it would be read right here, right now, as Haman is in the court ready to ask for the execution of Mordecai, that it would be read that earlier Mordecai was the one that found out about the plot for the assassination of the king's life, and that it was written down that he was the one and that he was never rewarded for it, that it was just God's complete timing, that it would be now that it was read. And sometimes when things like this happen in our lives, we sometimes would call that, well, is that coincidence? Is this just coincidence that this would happen? And I believe that there is no coincidence with God, that it's God's divine appointment, that it's again the providence of God, that God is ordaining time and place and situation, that God is ordering man's steps, that God is putting all of these things together, that he's not only orchestrating my life, but he's orchestrating all of those people around me, because I am more interested in my own life, obviously. Not saying that I'm selfish, or I try certainly not to be selfish, but we are all the most interested in our own lives because we're human. But God isn't just focused on one person. He's focused on humanity. He's focused on all of us, and we're all interconnected. And so everything is going on at one time. And so God places each person and each thing that's going on to interact and interweave itself, that has to do with his providence, his timing, and all of these things that go on. And so I don't believe there is luck or chance or coincidence, that all of these things are his ordaining, his putting things into place. And so these are the things that are going on. And this is a great example of that. So we continue. King Xerxes asks, is there anything that we've done for Mordecai? And the response is no. According to your chronicles, nothing has been done for him. So in verse 4, he says that the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. So again, Mordecai is so anxious, so impatient to get Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he's already erected. So he is so sure of himself, so sure of the king's favor on him, that he had already erected the gallows, had them erected. And again, we've already talked about the gallows previously in part 1 of this week on Sunday. So sure of himself and so impatient to get this accomplished, to get this warrant or permission to have this done, probably this morning, today, this later today, or whatever the case might be, that he wanted the first thing to happen, the first person to see the king to be himself, that he came first thing in the morning, as soon as the court opened, that he's here. And so he's impatient, he's ready, he wanted to be there. And so the king said, who's in the court? In verse 5, it says, his attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. So likewise, once the king found out that somebody saved his life earlier, that there was an assassination attempt on his life, and that Mordecai, one of his attendants, one of his persons that sat at his gate, saved his life earlier, and nothing was done to reward him for it, he also was impatient and wanted to do something. And so he asked, is there anybody in my court? Is there anybody in my court right this second that could do something about it? And so right this moment, he's also impatient. And so he said, is there anybody in my court? And they went out and looked and said, well, yeah, actually, Haman's out there. And so he's like, oh, excellent. Haman can do something about it. Haman is high up in my ranks, and Haman can do something. Go send for him. Tell him to come right in. Look at the providence of God. So So this perfect collision of circumstance here. Here's somebody who's impatient to have Mordecai assassinated. And here's somebody who is wanting Mordecai to be rewarded. And they're both wanting to be sent for. One's wanting to reward him. One's wanting to be sent for to kill him. And wow, here it is. So verse 6, again, this is no coincidence. This is God at work. Verse 6, when Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there the king would rather honor than me? What a piece of work this guy is. So Haman just forgets momentarily about why he's even there. He's like, wow, the king has invited me in before he even probably gets dressed and goes into the court, puts on his kingly garment and goes in and sits in his throne and sits and presides over the court. He invites me, Haman, into his inner bedroom or whatever it is, invites me in. He just can't contain himself in my presence. He just wants to honor me. Man, the king just can't contain himself. And he's just even asking me, how can he honor me? I mean, golly, this guy just is so full of himself, so full of pride. So thinking he's obviously talking about him. I mean, how could he not, right? Verse 7, so he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe. Make sure it fits me. The king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden. Make sure it's everything about you, because, I mean, I'm probably going to be king next, because, I mean, why wouldn't I be? One with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Are you getting all this down, Kingy baby? Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets. Now, this is really important. Are you listening? Proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. That's the most important part. Now, make sure you do all the rest, but this is the most important part. Make sure you scream, have this guy who's leading me on the horse, leading the person that you intend to honor down the street. Make sure that they yell this or proclaim this down the street. Make sure everybody hears it. This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. That's important. A person would love that. Verse 10. So the king says, go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and horse and do just as you have suggested. And you know, he's just beaming like, yeah. Do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. Could you just imagine Haman's countenance just go, what? My mortal enemy who sits at the king's gate, do not neglect anything you have recommended. So not only am I doing everything you recommended, and not only is it not you, but it's going to be your enemy. And then not only is it not going to be not you, and it's going to be your enemy, but you have to do it. Proverbs 16:18 says this: pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. I mean, nothing embodies that proverb more than this. So we continue, verse 11. So Haman got the robe and the horse. I mean, what else is he going to do? So the king had no idea of this conflict between Mordecai and Haman. He had no idea. And Haman can't say to the king, I hate this man. This man doesn't kneel to me. Or I came to ask you to hang him on the gallows that I've built. That's why I came so early. He couldn't do that because the king was saying, I want to honor him. He was stuck between the proverbial rock and a hard place. He had to do what the king told him to do. So Haman got the robe, verse 11, and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. He has certainly fallen. Verse 12, afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. So Mordecai went right back to his humble beginnings, went right back to the king's gate. But Haman rushed home. I mean, he ran with his tail between his legs, with his head covered in grief. What this really means is his head was covered in shame and in grief, meaning he was mourning as if someone close to him died. He was mourning. He was in disbelief. He was confused, and he was shamed. So he went home and told Zeresh, his wife. Remember, his wife and his friends put him up to this. His wife and his friends said, this is how you do it. You build this contraption. You build this death trap for Mordecai. He went right back to them. He told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Remember, we've talked in this series already what origin Haman is from and what origin Mordecai is from. So it's in the books. It's already certain that God is on Mordecai's side and that Haman is of the Antichrist spirit, that God is for Mordecai and that God is moving in his life, that Haman, it is already now set, he is going to fall. Verse 14, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. And so Haman, I'm sure at this point, was like, oh yeah, that's right. Esther, the queen, has invited me and the king to a banquet. So maybe his spirits were raised up a little bit. I still have this. Maybe not all is lost. We'll continue our story next week. I hope you can join me for more mini bites.